Ships on vigor of the waves are skimming barren summits to the verdant plains. Each horizon is a new beginning. Rise and reign. Far from the fjords and the ice-cold currents, ravens soar over new frontiers. Songs and sagas of a fate determined, shields and spears. Vows of vigor of the thrill of plunder, pull together for the clan and kin. Clank of hammers and the crash of thunder.
Hey, how's it going, my friends? This is Nick from the Nerd Frenzy Podcast. And today, we get to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. And we get to share a combination. Oh my gosh. The Brent and Crystal Parker package, everyone. Hi, guys.
That's how we are to be announced officially from here on out. The Brent and Crystal Parker package. They call it the BCPP. That's
BCPP.
Oh man, see that 10 times
announced
fast.
by Macho Man Randy Savage.
Yeah, if it's not announced by Macho Man Randy Savage, I won't enter a room actually. 100%
Oh,
won't
man.
come in to any establishment unless that happens.
If you asked me to do that again, it would be 100% different. If you're like, hey, do it exactly the same, I'd be like, oh, okay. And he'd be like, oh, what you guys doing? I'm like, okay, no, that's not it, man.
That was perfect. I only want to ever be announced that way from here on out. That was absolutely amazing. Nick, it's so good to see you. It's been a hot minute.
Absolutely.
And you invited my lovely wife on.
Mm-hmm.
So we're actually super excited
Hi,
about this
Crystal.
topic. We have to be
Howdy.
big fans.
So we were talking about this right before we started this up. This is something that has literally just triggered everything that we love in fantasy and role-playing. Everything like imagination, it all stems from Dungeons and Dragons.
I mean, yeah, I would say a massive part of where just general nerd media of any kind of nature, be it cinema, be it comic books, whatever kind of, I think owes a pretty hefty hand to Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm not saying obviously like Marvel clearly was, they've been around forever, long before Dungeons and Dragons. But I think looking at just big names in cinema, Stephen Colbert is like a really, really good example of a man who is super, super nerdy and super into role playing stuff. I mean, he's obviously a Lord of the Rings fanatic. But on top of that, he is a big supporter of he's done D&D. He's done it with several other individuals and little kind of snippets for Red Nose Day, which was really, really cool.
I always liked watching those. Those are always fun. The Game of Thrones ones were awesome.
Remember Ned Stark, he was a lot of fun, but he didn't make it past season 1.
Yep, Vin Diesel, that's another one. He did some D&D stuff, and he said he's a huge fan of it. And these aren't, I'm just spitballing here for names and stuff.
Oh, you can just
pulling it out
Vince
of the hat.
Vaughn, Joe Magliano. There's a lot of big ones.
Yeah, Joe Manganiello is probably the biggest currently. I know he's working on like a Dungeons and Dragons like film. They're working to get an actual D&D film.
Oh, can it be better than the other one?
Like a good one. I think they're gonna go with Dragonlance, the Dragonlance like universe, which is
Okay, yeah.
Oh, what are those authors? Not Terry Pratchett, Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. Thank you, we got there. Their entire huge series and like which spawned so much material fantasy wise. They're working to get that off the ground. If I recall correctly, that's what it's supposed to be. So D&D is huge right now, and it's been huge now for a few years. I don't really know exactly what brought it to the forefront, so to speak, of like this huge kind of like, I don't know how to call it, like a nerd revolution to a certain degree. But it's such an encompassing topic, and there's so much to cover, and there's so much to talk about that I guess maybe we'll start with you, Nick, who has had like, maybe like a little less D&D experience. What has been your experience with D&D, and like what are you curious about that perhaps Crystal and I could enlighten you on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first time I ever really actually wanted to play D&D, there were 2 times that hit me, but the first time was easily watching the first, I think it was the first, second episode of Freaks and Geeks, actually. And they were, all the nerds were playing it, and James Franco, he was the rebel James Dean kind of character, and he was, the cool guy in school that smoked weed and everything. And then he's like, yeah, I'll play with you guys. And he ended up having a great time. And I remember thinking, because they showed about 15 minutes of them actually playing, and I remember watching them going, oh, so this is you literally use your imagination about everything, and then you have the DM, which you are so fantastic at it, who kind of is the rule guy, the narrator, the author, and you just kind of make sure everything runs smoothly. And it's the dynamic that you don't really need anything, and you can go into a faraway world where you can actually create words just like you see in books and whatnot, and you can make adventures with your family and friends. It's the coolest thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Crystal, what is your kind of like take so far on D&D? You used to play it a lot, when you were young. You played it before I did. You were in fact a huge fan. I used to roast D&D all the time, which was a huge mistake on my end because it's fantastic. But what's your kind of like, what's your background a little bit with it to give the people an idea?
Like a personal background?
Yeah.
I started playing in high school, so probably like 2003-ish, and we played like 3.5, and we were really like fast and loose with the rules, just, having fun with our collective imaginations.
Did you like the 3.5, or because I heard that 3.5, it was I don't know, it halted something when it came to the play, but then 4 brought it back or whatnot.
I thought it was I don't know what the correct term would be, really rulesy, I guess.
Yeah,
There wasn't
yeah.
as much RP in it, so that's why we kind of like discarded some of the rules more in favor of role playing just for funsies.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I guess for those who don't know, to cover what we're talking about a little bit, so Dungeons and Dragons has gone through several iterations of rules. The first and second iterations are pretty old school. They're pretty classically popular. 3.5, what we're talking about there is 3.5 is this rule set that D&D first really kind of encompassed everything you could do. There was a rule for almost everything you could do. You wanted to pick a lock, there was a rule for that somewhere. So the reason 3.5 is kind of loved and hated as far as a rule set goes is because it's so granular that you can figure out how to be your character could be very, very good at something because there's math. There's some math you can manipulate to be very, very good at something. That at the same time, like Crystal just kind of stated, D&D lost a little bit, somewhat of its role-playing flavor because everything you wanted to do, it wasn't as it was all mechanical. And then, like Nick said, the fourth iteration was very video gamey, just so everybody gets an idea of, like, it was very, like, you have powers, more or less. It wasn't much of an action like that. You just had, like, I'm a giant dragon man who can now breathe fire for one day-ish kind of thing. So it was very kind of explosive and more, like, really combat-oriented and very kind of fast-paced. And now, the iteration we're in would be 5th edition. And 5th edition is I think, a really good hybrid. Crystal, what do you think? I think it offers a lot of, like, role play, and it offers just enough mechanics where you can kind of pick and grab what you need at the time, but it's very flexible, I think, in my opinion. And I think that's part of what brought this kind of to the forefront a little bit, was a really good rule set.
Yeah, I think there's a really good reason why 5th edition is the most popular, because it's the easiest to play off the cuff, and I think it's the easiest to dive into as a first-time player.
Yeah, I would agree. Sorry, I wanted to make sure when we were talking about the rule set that people had a history or a timeline of how the rule sets kind of looked a little bit.
Yeah, and I like I was telling you guys, I want everyone to know as much as they possibly can get from watching this podcast. So if they can get a little bit like, oh, this sounds interesting, yeah, let's definitely get them going, and maybe we can start a little group thing where a few people actually say, hey, I'll start a game with you. I'm like, okay, cool.
Oh yeah, it'd be great to see people do that. I love watching people start games. We have a Discord where we've done several one shots with some people who have been interested, and actually, we just talked about it today. We were playing some games together before the podcast, and I mentioned tonight's topic was about D&D, and I had 2 people who were like, hey, yeah, by the way, when are we doing our next one shot? I'd really love to do it again. And we've played 2 one shots so far with people. We just met on the internet, and everybody's had an absolute delight. It just had a blast. It's absolutely delightful. It's so fun.
How long do they usually last for?
I try and limit mine now to 2 hours for the one shot. D&D is this thing where it's a real monster that can get out of hand. You'll end up having so much fun, and things kind of take a little bit of time. But when you find yourself sucked into, like, the imaginary worlds and stuff you're creating, the stories you're telling, suddenly we used to play for like 10 hours back in the day. When I first started gaming, we used to play for like 10 hours and stuff, and it's really easy to kind of get sucked into that. Now, I try and keep things a little tighter, a little more concise, and around that 2-hour mark is usually pretty solid.
Well, and in Stranger Things, they had a different name for the game, but it was definitely obviously inspired by D&D, and they were talking about, like, hey, Mom, just a little bit longer. And she's like, no, you guys have been down there for already a little bit. And she goes, oh, we've only been down here for 9 hours. And she's like, 9 hours? And yeah, it's like, oh, wow, you guys can have like 4 friends and with sword and magic hands and vipers coming out of your eyeballs, whatever your imagination allows.
Yeah.
And there's no, I mean, at first, like it happens with everyone. I remember when I first did it, I was doing it with you and Scotty actually, and I remember I was thinking, and I'm a very easy, like, oh, okay, well, I'll be silly, I have no problem. But when you're pretty much saying, hey, Nick, this is 100% off of you. I mean, you're saying these things, what you want to happen, and then I am kind of giving it the flesh and everything that it needs, and and then you roll the dice, and that determines your fate and whatnot. It's just it's like, and all of a sudden you're playing, you're like, oh, there's a lot going on right now.
Yeah, it kind of can get to a lot, and I think you can definitely be overwhelming. I think the first time you see a character sheet, and I think Crystal can attest to this, it seems like a lot at first. Learning where everything kind of is and where everything sits. I guess maybe we should try and break down maybe a little bit of the history of D&D on top of where we're at, and work our way through perhaps like up to doing maybe a demo run, or just kind of like breaking down some of the scenarios of D&D. But I think what's fascinating about Dungeons and Dragons is a little bit of the dogma behind it. It's a little bit of its history is quite intriguing. The death of D&D was almost a real thing. It was kind of insane. And I think to give people like an idea of even just fun, flavorful things to check out and kind of get a familiarity with D&D, we should maybe start how it all kind of started.
Absolutely.
And I think I'll just start by saying D&D comes from tabletop wargaming back in the day. Like Warhammer is my only conceptual thing I can tell you of that, because I don't know a lot of tabletop war games, kind of like Painted Soldiers and all that other kind of stuff. That's where it came from. And the general concept that Gary Gygax kind of broke down was, he used to do a lot of wargaming with his friends, was instead of doing an entire army, instead of, leading all these different troops and units and all this other stuff, what if you kind of just led one character, one individual, and that's kind of where the birth of it begins a little bit. I'm not a huge history buff on D&D itself, but basically D&D is born from Gygax and his mind, and there's kind of an anecdotal thing that's kind of neat where during the creation of D&D, Gary Gygax was always out playing it and testing it constantly, and it got to the point where his wife thought he was having an affair. And it's kind of a funny, fascinating story to follow up on. But in the end, obviously, he's like, no, I'm making like a weird tabletop game. I'm sitting in like a basement with like 4 other adult men, and we're rolling dice, and I'm
which is
working stuff out.
maybe even worse than the affair.
Yeah, right? A little. And so it's just, so it's got like a cool, flavorful little history. And then, Crystal, if you'd like, I'd like you to talk a little bit about, because I think you're just a little more informed on it, would be what I call, and what a lot of people claim at the time, was be like the Satanic Panic. And what that kind of broke down to was the near death of D&D after it really reached a semblance of popularity. There was kind of a fascinating story where D&D kind of caught a lot of heat for it and some other stuff. And if you want to kind of run that down, babe, I think that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, I can do that. So D&D came out like 1974-ish, and it was pretty much this game that really flew under the radar for quite a while. It was big with nerds, but not really anybody else really knew much about it. And then in, I think it was 1979, there was this kid he was only 16 years old, but he was already in college. It was like the Michigan State University, who was really into D&D, and he actually ended up like going missing, and a lot of people wondered if it was like D&D related, because he was found alive in the tunnels beneath his school. He was found like a month later, which is crazy. He lived in these tunnels and these sewers for literally a month, because their D&D maps that he played with his friends were actually based off those tunnels, and that's how he was able to survive down there. But unfortunately, he had like a lot of like personal issues and stuff like that, and he ended up like taking his life like a year later.
Oh, jeez.
And so it kind of like got this, D&D kind of got this bad rap about how maybe like this game influenced him to make these decisions. And what really didn't help that was about a couple years later, there was another young fellow who who was really into D&D and ended up taking his life. He like shot himself in the chest, and his mom was really convinced that his playing Dungeons and Dragons influenced him to do this. and it actually came to the point where she, I believe, sued one of the people he played D&D with, which was actually his high school principal.
Yes.
And the
course
court
it
case
was.
is thrown out and all this jazz. But she ended up starting an organization called like BAD is an acronym, BADD, and it's called like bothered about Dungeons and Dragons, and she ended up
Lord.
spreading. It sounds silly now to think about it, but like back in the day in the 80s, because this was like 1982, 83 ish, like Satanism was like a huge big deal. It was
1983.
like people were like really worried about it, and they were worried that like D&D was influencing their children to get involved with Satan and stuff like that.
I want to read a little thing here because I pulled up the article real quick. The individual's name, the dude who went missing, the young man, 16-year-old, James Dallas Egbert III. That's the one who disappeared. Okay. And then in 1982, the high school student you're talking about, Irvin Lee Pulling. And so this is kind of the thing I want to talk about was this is what his mother described D&D as, and this is a quote, a fantasy role-playing game which uses demonology, witchcraft, voodoo, murder, rape, blasphemy, suicide, assassination, insanity, sex, perversion, homosexuality, prostitution, satanic-type rituals, gambling, barbarism, cannibalism, Satanism, desecration, demon summoning, necromantics, divination, and other teachings. I don't think you could have put anything else bad in that entire paragraph because I think you have covered every horror you could conceive, and I think it's fascinating that technically, in a way, all of this could be true, depending on like the game you're running and playing to a certain degree. The idea, though, that like the moment you open a box, you can just see like the hood of Satan just, like roll over you. And yes, my little deviants, it's time to become sexually active and to begin committing various crimes outside our game world. It's
Brent, we all know.
Man,
Don't be funny. We all know that Charles Manson made all of his people play that game, and then they all killed all those people. So I don't know why you're making light of that. It's not funny, okay?
I would have been incredibly impressed if all those kids on LSD could play Dungeons and Dragons.
I would be stunned if you were like, I'm on LSD and can play D&D as a cognitive human being. I've seen people high play it, and it's not great. It ends in about a B+.
This is like ha.
Decision making is awful. It's like, there's a cliff. You could jump off that. It's like, I'd fucking live. Like, would you? I'm jumping. I wouldn't. And then they just do it. It's about what it's like. It's pretty great. But yeah, so I mean, Crystal gave you guys kind of just a quick breakdown, a little bit of like this kind of insane movement that happened, and there was a lot of with this bad group. They actually worked with a lot of really conservative and Christian groups to get like a whole bunch of anti-D&D propaganda and everything out there. So
Burn some
D&D
books and all that awesomeness, yeah.
Yeah, all that good, all the stuff of like a normal like fledgling society to burn books and normal good stuff.
Yeah, actually, the first time I heard about D&D was actually in some Christian propaganda comic. It was a chick tract. It's kind of that famous one or whatever about a girl who plays Dungeons and Dragons and ends up like, I think, joining a cult and then giving her friend's soul to the devil. It's not a good read. Would not recommend.
It sounds entertaining to me, guys. I mean, it sounds to me like you play Dungeons and Dragons and your soul
Only
is mine.
good things are gonna happen. That's the truth. Only you're gonna basically live a rock star life, but definitely with a lot of Satanism.
This game's a lot like Jumanji. The moment you start opening it up, it just comes alive, and then the worst demons comes and they possess you, and then you go hang out with Charles.
Yeah, and you just do wild, crazy shit. So for those who are listening still, D&D does obviously not cause you to absolutely lose your mind and do all this other stuff, obviously. But for a really long time, again, because especially yes, there is like the idea of magic, incantation. In fact, when you look at one of the main books called A Monster Manual, it's full of demons, devils, dragons, and crazy shit. It's full of stuff like that. However, it's no different from reading a fantasy novel and there being a demon, devil, whatever in there, obviously, right? And it's just one of those things where it's unfortunate that it got to that stage, and it's unfortunate that poor young man went kind of undiagnosed for his own mental, problems. And same with the other one up shooting himself. It's very unfortunate. But D&D is
Yeah.
not the culprit. In fact, some people find D&D to actually kind of end up being more therapeutic than anything else. It's kind of fascinating.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. You're venting a lot of your, things out. You're kind of getting some of your actual maybe desires kind of out in a silly kind of way. And if anything, first of all, two things. If you read a lot of books, this is probably something that you would love to do. And if you don't read any, if you hate reading books, this is something you'd probably want to try that would be kind of almost in the same kind of line of reading a book. It'd just be, because both would, inspire
Yeah, it's
and give you imagination. So,
yeah, and on that actually, kind of what we're talking about, we should kind of now break down in Crystal. I think this will be kind of cool. We should break down kind of how D&D works as a collective,
Please,
right?
please
as
do.
You as a player, from breaking down like we'll just kind of cover making a character as a player, and then we'll kind of cover making a world as a DM, and then how a player and a DM kind of join together to kind of create this ever evolving, ever changing kind of story, more or less. And that's the best way I can possibly explain it right now until we kind of get our feet under us. So let's say, obviously, listeners, that everybody wants to play D&D. Okay, I think one of the coolest things about D&D, first off, is creating the character, and I think one of the best things about creating the character is really flexing your imagination and running wild with an idea or a concept. There's a huge thing about kind of like fulfilling like that idea of if you always thought the Terminator was so fucking cool, like the Terminator is just the coolest idea ever, and you want to embody that idea of the Terminator as a character, but never found the right game, never found the right outlet. D&D is something that would allow you to make a Terminator-based character that you could write an entire backstory and really get very, very creative. And that's the place I want to start, is this backstory idea and the creativity that D&D allows. So, and maybe you don't have to do this if you don't want to, I'm just going to ask, do you maybe want to share a little bit about some of the characters you've created? And you don't have to go in super detail, but like about the inspirations for their backstories or some of your favorite characters you've had, and what about those characters that you were really drawn to kind of give us an idea of where this character idea starts.
Oh, sure. I feel like, because like you said, if you're not very creative, or even if you're like only a little creative, you already kind of attach yourself to the backstory of like a fictional character you like a lot. And like for whatever reason, I always go to like Batman because like, he's the loner, his parents are dead, he's rich and shit. So you really, I don't know, I always kind of go with like the orphan story, because you want to have a character that you can just throw into a world and doesn't have any attachments, so that they can just go off with an adventuring party. It's not a big deal. But one of the characters I made, I wanted to do the complete opposite of that, and I made a character called Chanting Storms, who had a nice family. He was a tabaxi, and his family actually showed up a lot. Thanks to you, because you were a fantastic DM and you played all of his family members very well.
That's sweet. God was nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was sweet. So
you rascal, Brent.
and I'm really glad you brought Chances Stars, because that's a really good example of how to merge. So long story short, what Crystal did was sat down and designed this character, and for her, she really went into some detail and provided me as far as the DM side. I get to learn their personalities and stuff. When they kind of describe themselves on their character sheet, it says, like Chanting Storms was very, maybe curious isn't the right term, but maybe driven is a good term. Would you say?
Yeah, driven.
Okay.
And curious is good. Always searching knowledge.
Yep. And so what's cool is you get the chance to really detail out a character. And I mean, the character sheet will guide you through, you'll do some basic math with rolling some dice to create what's called your stat block, which just determines the things you're good at and the things you're not good at, right? And then when you pick your class and the subclass, basically is you say, I want to be a wizard, and the subclass, that's your main class. Your subclass then for your wizard would say, I want to be a wizard that specifically works with elemental magics, right? So you're a wizard that is oh shit, I don't remember the term.
Arcane?
Yeah, sure, we'll go with that. Like you're an arcane wizard would be your entire thing. So you build this whole thing, and then you have that whole chance to look at this sheet and read all these kind of statistical things about your character that can then influence you of like Crystal had. Chanting Storms was always searching knowledge. So Chanting Storms was always a little like hesitant towards Chanting Storms wouldn't kill people. That was a big thing with Chanting Storms. Didn't want to kill anyone ever. It was not about running around being a murder hobo. So as me, the DM, got to read this, I could then kind of help create scenarios to put Chanting Storms into those things where Chanting Storms could face like internal conflict, where they're fighting someone who has every intention of killing them, who has seen them and believed them to be an absolute enemy, and now Chanting Storms has to deal with the consequence of not killing this person, or the internal family struggle. Because when we played that character, Crystal played with another player who they were brothers, so it would show up. There was a very different dynamic between the two brothers for how they behaved with their father and their mother and the way they spoke to them. And it really helped me just as an individual then, where she gave me a nice outline that the father was they're all traveling entertainers is what they were. So then I kind of got to just kind of take this outline as the DM and say, okay, well, the father's very boisterous, very loud. He likes to come in and be like this. He all chanted storms. It was a very boisterous and a very like overly loving, like almost Italian-esque kind of father, very pinch the cheek and everything else. And then I got to work with the mother, who I didn't want to just be this loud, chaotic thing, so I took that, and Crystal gave me the complete freedom to really enjoy myself with it, and she was much more gentle. She wanted her baby boys to be safe and be kind. And this isn't really their accent. I'm not really nailing it. But basically, then the three brothers she had and everything else, I got to really flex a creative muscle that I don't think anything else out there gives it to you. I think there's a lot of really great role-playing games. I think Skyrim, I think Mass Effect, I think,
World
Destiny,
of Warcraft.
World of Warcraft. All these are great role-playing games that really let you kind of inhabit worlds to a certain degree, but nothing like D&D, where both as a player or as a DM, where you really get to flex and create that special thing that is wholly uniquely yours, but then on top of it, to watch it grow and evolve. Like I said, I was very fortunate that Crystal is a fantastic player who likes to do, I would say, complex background things, and she gives me the freedom to take those background things and really then take her little nest egg and really make it my own, but join it to hers at the same time. It's a very symbiotic relationship, and that's the most fascinating thing about D&D, is the symbiosis between player and DM. Because there's, sorry, I'm gonna get a little off track there. Before I go into that, what I want to kind of go to next, because D&D is really all inclusive, and it's hard to kind of grab everything I want here. After you as a player make a character and everything, and you sit down with your group of individuals, generally speaking, D&D is played in a group of like 3, 4, 5 people, generally. Crystal, you've been playing with the same group for what? You've been playing for 4 or 5 years?
A few years, yeah. Switching out a few different people at times, but we've been pretty fortunate.
Yeah, we've been very, very fortunate.
Good for you guys. That's awesome.
It's really kind of cool. And what I think is really neat is you guys have a very unique chemistry, but I don't think it's unique in the idea that like it kind of grew out of nowhere. The other thing really cool about D&D is it's a game you have to have cooperative respect, and yet you have to have problem-solving skills or conflict resolution skills, and it really, really also helps navigate that. We've had several players who are a bit, what's the term, babe? Like chaotic, maybe? Maybe not chaotic as much as like bold, perhaps?
Spontaneous.
Spontaneous. We'll go with spontaneous. And so what's rad about, okay, so World of Warcraft, right? You're in a party of 5 and you're in a dungeon, okay? It's pretty consistent what activity you're going to do, right? You know where you're going to go. We're going to head down this hall. We're going to
Right, you have a role. You have a role. There's going to be healers. There's going to be damage guy. There's going to be the tank. There's going to be what is it? There's one more. There's the, I guess just the
DPS.
The DPS. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, and like I said, so you get the role, right? You're going to perform a function, you're going to do your thing, you're going to get the loot, and you're going to get out of there.
Mm-hmm.
Great, D&D can be ran like that. Mm-hmm. More often than not, D&D is ran a little more complex, where it's more of social interaction, and that tends to become the problem, especially when there's 4 players in a group and 2 of their players are really role-playing very into their characters and trying to behave and consider, much like an actor, what their character would do. And when there's an opposition of things, I want to steal this thing and I want to return it, right? Now you get these kind of cool impromptu dynamic problem solving issues where someone has to give, or you have to navigate that, and there's nothing else out there that does that. There's no other, as far as, again, there are plenty of other role-playing tabletop games that allow you to role-play, but I'm saying collectively between the video game realm and whatever other realm you can participate in that isn't role-playing, as far as D&D, nothing else does that, and it's fascinating. It's wonderful to watch as a DM to sit back and let that scene unfold. It's like watching a play for you, really. That's
Absolutely.
for you, Nick, is probably, a much closer example is when you sit and you watch a play and you watch characters have conflict in a play, and you get really absorbed sometimes because it's a fascinating conflict, or like you're really rooting for a character. As a DM, it comes to that. You'll see these characters really square off emotionally, and it's addictive. It's like drugs. You're just like, oh my god, that's so cool. And at the end of a session, you've had a really good session when the two players who were just like really, at it with each other, so to speak, at the end go, oh my god, that was so cool. I didn't know you were going to do that. I had no idea. I had no clue. I really want to return that. It's like, yeah, but my character wouldn't. And to watch them then like dive in outside of the game and really revisit all that is so rewarding. And there's just nothing else like it. Babe, is there anything you want to kind of put in on that as far as just character dynamics and groups and playing with
I'd
other
say
people?
it definitely has to be cooperative, because if you only have even if you have one character who's not cooperative, you're gonna have a bad time. It's definitely like there's that balance that has to be found between, you think, what would my character do versus what I would want to do, and it can be really hard to find where you would do that thing, and or how you think like the other players are going to react to something. But I don't know how to describe it. It's like you said, it's really symbiotic with how the DM plays, how everything works out.
And that's another cool thing too, Brent, where any DM, they could be out to get you. They could be on your side. They could just be kind of like, oh, I am a fair, judge. I do not, they complete. But the cool thing about this game is there's no wrong way to play it. I mean, and then there's millions of ways to play it. I mean, there's billions of ways to play it, but there's so many different ways that you could try it. And what you guys are saying, which is awesome too, is you guys have family or friends that you're very close with, that you eventually get that bond where you guys are not afraid to really just like almost act and and put yourself in that situation, and then the moment it's done, you're almost sweating, going like, oh my gosh, guys, what just happened? I mean, I feel like I just watched a 10-hour Lord of the Rings movie, but I was in it.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I think a big rule to start with too as a player, as we're talking about the player side too, is and we're very fortunate again. Like you said, we do know everybody we've played with. I don't think I've ever really brought in a complete stranger, and that's because I'm very particular. I'm very, very, very picky, because this is very special to both me and Crystal. It's something we share together, and I don't want it ruined. And then we have a very, very special respect at our table. I mean, everybody's pretty close, and everybody is very respectful of each other's kind of time, and it's hard. It's hard to find that balance when you're just meeting people on how your kind of conversation table and everything needs to flow, because it's very easy, because there's no wrong way to play it. It's very easy to become like blind to the players around you, especially if you're like, I'm a heavy role player. It's very easy to be sucked into like, I want to talk to this shopkeep, and all of a sudden, you've spent 4 hours with just you talking to the shopkeep, and no one else has done anything, and they're like at their phones, and they're not having fun.
Right.
But conversely, it's also really hard to play with like what I would call a chaotic player, or someone who's more self-centered, as far as just like, maybe they're just like, okay, well, I want to go kill stuff. As soon as I go kill stuff, they're not interested until they're in combat again. They're somewhere else. Someone else will try and engage with them or talk with them, or like, well, this isn't the part I like, so I'm not here. And it's hard to find a flow and a balance for that. And it's okay, there's nothing wrong with like enjoying certain aspects of it more than others, obviously, and in being there for a particular reason. I think it helps if you are there to try everything a little bit. I think that helps coming with that mindset of like, yeah, I like killing stuff and looting stuff and getting powerful and having that power trip dream. I think that's great, but it's good, like, especially if most people who tend to enjoy film, if you've ever had that acting desire, or even just a thought or a concept, or want to even stretch that muscle just a little bit, D&D can really let you explore that avenue and really be like, okay, I'm just going to try a voice. I'm going to go for a voice. I'm going to give it a shot. This is who I am now. Is this okay? Is this right? Is my character simple? I don't know. Like, you can really just step in and give it a run, and hopefully do it in a place, that's safe, or no one's just, what is that? Why are you doing that? That's weird. Stop being weird. But that takes a lot of time and a lot of trust, And I would say if you're a new player, especially if you're getting into like, you can go to a game shop and play this almost anywhere. As a player, be respectful. Sit down and recognize that you're there to do a cooperative experience, like we've said, and that people are going to be a little different and you need to kind of get to know them. And also be aware that
Like a real team, first of all. Like
Yeah, a team,
Batman and
for sure.
Superman are never going to get along, but they're going to have to if they're going to take down, Darkseid, or So
Yeah.
it's what, and that's the thing. Like all those characters. I mean, maybe Flash might get along with everyone, but for the most part, they're kind of all like, no. In a typical situation, you and I would maybe not be friends, but it's a beautiful thing. And when you play these kind of games, you're absolutely right. Could you imagine if everyone's like in the zone? We're like, all right, man, I got my character. I know exactly. I've been thinking about this all long hours. I'm really excited, and everyone else feels the exact same way. And all of a sudden, go. I mean, it could be. You're painting these worlds that you could never make a movie about ever. It's just too.
Yep.
It's just too amazing.
Yeah, there's so much, and it's just it's hard because there's a lot of moving parts. It's just really important that if you come, I think, especially to play D&D, D&D is also like it's become a very it's a very safe haven for a lot of people. For a lot of people, it's a place where they come to, a sense of escapism for sure. And it's also a place where, especially the community has recently grown in years to be very, very accommodating and very welcoming to all types of all life of all peoples. And it's really important to come in with that mentality because, again, number one, you don't want to, not being able to make a bunch of really great relationships because you came in and you just wanted to only do things your way. Number two, that's not really great growth for us as people, right?
Right.
To sit there and just, and D&D allows us to grow as people. It allows us to be empathetic with our characters and experience things that we probably could never necessarily experience, or at least open up our ideas to different viewpoints.
Or to honestly just even change, like, because most of us, we're taught and conditioned to be extremely good and kind, but maybe sometimes we're like, no, I don't want to be kind, but I don't want to hurt anyone, so maybe I'll be a piece of crap in this, and then it will kind of I'll flesh my character out, and the other characters will be like, oh, here comes the broken heart, and then broken heart does does dark things throughout the whole thing, but at the end of the day, he's like, hey, this is going on, but I'll help you guys. And it's still, and it just allows for this much more dynamic story that now has kind of a villain, like a Loki-like person who's like, hey, I'm usually a piece of shit, but I'll help you because the world's gonna end if I don't. So whatever, I'll help you.
Yeah, it makes for great tales to watch people really, again, explore the especially, again, the writing concept of taking characters. Loki's a great character. I mean, first off, just originally, and I think, and not to go too far on a tangent, his current series is fantastic, and watching him develop is wonderful. So to have someone come in and definitely try that and be in that realm and still be able to be, as a player, go, okay, I have to work within the group to not ruin the game. But how does this character respond to these things without ruining the game? And I think that's what I really, really encourage you to think about. Because it's very easy, and we've talked about this on the old D&D podcast, it's what my character would do. It's like this huge cop-out. Do not fall into that pit when you start playing D&D. Don't just say, well, that's what my character would do, and call it as a cop-out. When you're being shitty, you're being shitty.
It's obvious,
D&D
yeah.
is a collective. It's just, it sucks it has to be said, but it's true, because people will be like, the perfect example is 4 people are doing this thing collectively, and then one is just a selfish, greedy character. And so when the time comes where they're really, really required for possible character growth and stuff, they take the powerful item, and they leave, and everybody dies, and they're like, why? And you go, that's what my character would do, so we're going to play another campaign. I'm going to play this guy with this new fucking dope weapon, and then I'm going to be executed. And it's a real shitty thing to do, and you can see the entire scheming plot. However, we're like, in a real character dynamic, you have 4 people working together. You're going to overcome the current obstacle to then acquire what you need safely. Does that make sense? Generally
Absolutely.
speaking, very
Absolutely.
rarely is it like an Indiana Jones villain of like, aha, I've got what I want, good day, or like a Bond villain, haha, Bond, now enjoy these piranha, and he runs off with his, nuclear device. It's just, it's something to really consider. So really, we're getting really deep into D&D here.
We need to.
The
Get
real
deep.
depth, the real depth you can get into.
Because it does feel deep. It's like people get super invested in it. I remember when we were playing one time, just to as an example of how invested you kind of get into these characters and why it's so important to be cooperative. Because it actually means something to you, like in your soul, I guess. I remember one time we were playing, and there was this guy who was just a character you had that you made up was just whipping his horse and being a jerk, and it was it wasn't a big deal. It was just a guy whipping his horse, and this made up guy whipping this made up horse. It actually influenced us. It influenced one of the people of our party to go and like steal this guy's whip, even though it nothing was wrong. It was just a horse getting whipped, a made up horse.
Yeah.
He stole the whip, and that ended up sending us on a whole thing that like sidetracked us, I think, for 2 months, just because we stole a whip.
Well,
So this
yeah.
imaginary horse would not get whipped anymore.
Well, and the cool thing about that, Crystal, I mean, I know it sounds silly when you say it out loud, and because it is, but the cool thing about it is the fact that you get invested to the point where you're like, because in real life, no one wants to see a horse get whipped. So
Right?
we're like, if I could, I would go over there and just beat the crap out of you. But now you get to do that. But if you get to do it like in like a big old long elongated roundabout way where you can like really have some like story arcs that started off something small but then to get bigger. Next thing you know, you just created this whole like 3-parter that came from a silly little thing.
Yeah, it really did. That was a fascinating. I forgot about the whip. I forgot about all that. And that's the thing about D&D also is when you end up kind of embodying this world because you're doing so much role playing and so much fantasy kind of building, you unintentionally are invested. Where all of a sudden, there will be minor things, and it will make people upset. It will make them act and behave in just absolutely insane and wild ways. And I remember what's funny about that was just an in passing thing to show kind of this guy was just a piece of shit. He was like a nobleman, and he was on a trade route with these guys, and he was just a frustrated dude that day. Something had happened. I can't fully remember what it was. So the character was just taking his ventation out on this horse that wasn't moving fast enough for him. And it just established him as a person, right? That's all it was. It was just to indicate to them that when they dealt with this individual, maybe he's a little unstable, or maybe he's got a short temper or whatever. So we gotta, you would kind of plan ahead. And it fascinated me that the things that transpired with stealing the whip and the conflict that it created and all the kind of insanity that followed, all from just this in-passing moment. It was an in-passing impromptu, wasn't even a big, I just put it in there to put it in there for reference. And it's fascinating. And that's the beauty of D&D. The beauty is how quickly things develop, how quickly, like, a really great example is a lot of people are like, okay, I'm going to make this joke character. He's just a dwarf, and he runs around naked. And, he wears a loincloth to be polite in public, and all he does is punch shit. And you'll play that dwarf for 4 sessions, and suddenly you've sank 8 hours into this guy, and all of a sudden you're in this really bad fight, and you're low on hit points, and you're standing there going, oh shit, I can't die here. I cannot die. I like this dwarf. All right, Bill the dwarf is the shit, and I do not want him dead. And people will straight panic. They will lose their minds. I can't. It is so hard to express without like having a really good like grip. If you're listening to me, I sound insane right now. One thing you could definitely go check out, and I think one thing we should touch on for just the context also of D&D is Critical Role is probably one of the biggest influences currently in why D&D has become such this mainstream popular thing. And long story short, Critical Role is a bunch of voice actors from Hollywood who have done everything. You've heard their voices in everything. You've seen them in stuff. They are just very, very talented individuals, and they have played a consistent campaign now for like 4 or 5 years. They've played 2 campaigns, and now they've podcasted the last 2 that you can just watch. They're 4-hour sessions. You can just literally be on your drive to work or put it on and listen to it, and you will see absolute like stunning acting. First off, for just 6 or 8 people just sitting around a table talking to each other, you will see people cry, like genuine emotional tears of like actual emotional impact that they're having for real moments. And you'll see the craziest dumb shit. You'll see wild stuff where they all turn into cows and they fly and they can't stop laughing because they're flying cows hunting down this thing. It's so damn funny and it's so weird. But if you go and watch these things and you begin to watch how invested you'll become, you'll suddenly be like, I really like Vax as a character. As I'm listening to this podcast one time and I'm listening and learning about these people, whoever this guy is playing this Vax character, this dark, brooding rogue, I really like him. I don't know what it is about it. Maybe it's his voice. And all of a sudden, you're 110 episodes in and you're like, is he going to die? Is he gonna die? It's like you're watching like a great TV show. You're just 100% built into it. And then from being an outside looking in, it's fantastic to also watch the personal development of that character. The slow burn. It's like reading a really good book series, like you said earlier, Nick. Watching the slow, meaningful development where you'll see the moment of like true growth where you're like, oh shit, this is it. Vax could leave right here. He could just leave. He grab his sister. They could just go. They can leave right now. They don't have to do this. He's staying. Oh my God, they're staying. Oh my God, he's gonna stay. And like you've now witnessed like what does this mean for this character? Who do they become? And now imagine you get to be in charge of that. You start with this little seed of a character, and 15 sessions in, all of a sudden this seed has become a sprout that you care about. That like you talk about them after work. You sit there and you actually consider during an intense moment of negotiation of like, I think this is what I would do. I think this is what they would do. I think. Shit. And to be genuinely distressed is fascinating. No game in the history of video games, and I think it's such an important medium to compare to, is ever going to give you that sense of control and that sense of purpose to a certain degree of just playing something. It's truly... there's nothing else like it. And again, I sound like an insane person. I know I do, but I live and die by the fact that D&D is this wonderful magical thing to share. It really is. Crystal and I have had some wonderful stories and experiences that we'll never have any other way with anybody else. And there is some really wonderful personal jokes that are like, we have that really bond us to our friends around us because of D&D. We always bring up a time, we always give Tim shit. We constantly give Tim shit because it's a small in-group joke that Tim gets people killed. It's just a thing we constantly do now, and it's so nice to have it there for just us that we'll be in public talking about bullshit or whatever, and somebody like, well, yeah, you threw a torch. And I die every time. I think it's great because it reminds me of everybody having absolute panic attacks at the table, and it all started because he casually said, fuck it, and threw a torch. And an hour and a half later, I have people at the table sweating, cursing names, just absolutely screaming at their dice. They can't see straight. They're just absolutely distraught because someone threw a torch. And it's insane. It's absolutely insane to me. So that's my extra bit of a rant there. Is there anything else you want to cover, babe, or anything else you think?
Yeah. If you guys want to talk about anything else, but we probably should start that little thing if you want to.
Yeah, we can do that for sure.
Oh yeah, I was gonna suggest because you suggested Critical Role, which is fantastic. But if anybody's interested in like a tiny bite size of what D&D is, the DM from Critical Role, Matt Mercer, does a one shot with, you mentioned earlier, Stephen Colbert.
Yeah.
And it's only like 30 minutes long, but it's really good, and it's just a tiny little bit of what D&D is, and it's all
Master.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
he's like the god of DMs now.
Yeah, I didn't play D&D at all until I watched Critical Role. I caught it in passing one time because it said, voice actors playing Dungeons & Dragons, and I knew a bit of role playing, but I was like, actors doing this? What? No way. This is going to be weird. And, 2 entire campaigns later, there I am, completely hooked and invested, and it took literally, I think the first night I saw it, I think I came back to Crystal the next day, and I was like, so maybe I want to try D&D. I don't know. I think maybe I want to give this a run. So what we're going to do real quick, and we're going to keep this real simple, and we're going to keep it real relaxed. For those of you who are going, okay, so what I know about Dungeons & Dragons is it's math. It's dice. Okay, I know that it's dice. I know people are going to roll dice, and they're going to...
You nerds.
They're going to do math, and it's going to determine stuff. So this is how the basics of D&D work. So what I'm going to do for Crystal and Nick, okay? I'm going to be your DM. Okay. Now, Crystal, I don't know if you have any dice on your phone, or just look up a dice real quick. We're not going to do the extra math. I just
this is a quick, we're just going to be able to try to teach everyone how to do it.
Very top level.
And maybe eventually we can go ahead and do this for real. I'll try to join you guys' Friday night sessions for just, here and there.
That would be dope.
I could be the stranger who comes every once in a while to help or hurt you or whatever.
Mysterious stranger who talks like this. And he says, I'm here to help. My name's Nicholas. And I'm going to kill a dragon. And that's who I hope your character is. And I'm excited to see it. So, yeah, we're going to do this real top down. So this is how D&D works. What would normally happen is these two would have a character sheet in front of them each. And it would give them their abilities, their spells, and all their good stuff and their stats. What we're going to do is we're just going to walk through a quick scenario where I'm going to describe a room. And then I'm going to ask, Crystal, I'm going to ask you what you want to do. And then Nick, I'm going to ask you what you want to do. I'm going to ask them then to basically roll a dice. They're going to give me the number the dice comes up with. And that will be the determining factor on how successful they are or how bad they fail. How D&D works is basically a 5% chance system. It is a D20, it's called. So there's the number 1 to the number 20 on the dice. The number 1 would indicate you failed miserably. It means you absolutely ate shit and it was terrible. You're bad. And it's hilarious. A 20 means a 20 would indicate you succeeded fantastically. You are the best person that has ever lived and done this one thing, and you should be worshipped as such. So, everything between there kind of determines our difficulty. And basically, as a DM, your difficulty ranges are about 1 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20. Clearly, the lower, the easier something is. Okay? So that's it. That's the overall, the big how D&D works. Okay, without getting too nitty-gritty. So, I will have you two. I'm going to explain in this room. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Let's do this.
Okay. You enter a large cavernous space. It is about 15 feet across and about 20 feet long. Off to your left hang a series of stalagmites and stalactites. Hang and grow, I guess is a better term. There is green lichen growing across them. Straight ahead of you, the path continues on, and you can hear a distant tink, 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 but no discernible source is in sight. On the right side of the room looks to be a small pool, maybe 5 feet across, but you're unsure of how deep as the water is almost black like ink. Crystal, what would you like to do?
I would like to go over to, I think it was my left side, and break off a stalagmite.
Okay. As you approach and you reach out for the stalagmite, the moss itself wraps around your hand, gripping and pulling you towards it. Suddenly, the stalactites and stalagmites lift and grow, and they are no longer just rocks, but sharpened teeth, and you smell the scent of rot, decay, and old flesh. Crystal, go ahead and make a strength save. So roll your d20.
Oh man. I knew it. I should have rolled to investigate. Oh! Dude, I rolled a 20.
Oh.
Okay. With all your might, you pull your arm back, tearing the tethers of this green, sickly lichen. There is a... as the mouth then seems to close and pucker shut. Nick, what would you like to do?
I would like to walk over and drop a piece of garbage sitting next to the black pool and see what happens.
Okay. As you approach the pool, you dig in your pockets and find some discarded trash and you set it. It seems to float and lazily land next to the water. Nothing. What would you like to do next, Nick?
I like to stick my finger in the water.
You gently place your finger in the water and it's very cool to the touch. Almost uncomfortable, but not enough that it hurts.
I think I'll go a little bit further in.
As you plunge your hand deeper into the water and the ripples kind of run across the surface, you do see a small glimmer. In fact, it's not just a small glimmer, it's almost dagger-sized. Go ahead and make an investigation check. And this is where you're going to roll your dice, your d20.
$15.
You stare at the small, strange reflection and glow in the pool, and your hand reaches out for it, and it brushes against something metal. Would you like to grab it?
I would.
You wrap your hand around whatever it is, and you pull it out. And out from the ice-cold water extends this long, slim dagger. But the dagger blade itself is the exact same color of the blackish, thick water. So it's almost invisible to see when held against it. However, if you take the blade and move it across in the air, now you can see this almost semi-translucent blade is now in your hands. Crystal, what would you like to do?
Oh, I want to get the hell away from this situation I've got on my side of the room.
Okay, where do you want to go?
I will back into my companion and start my way down this hallway.
Nick, do you follow down the hallway?
I follow with my new sword, my new dagger.
As you guys walk down the hallway, it is dark. But when your eyes finally begin to adjust, and about 5 minutes later, taking your time, an orange glow emanates. Do you continue your approach?
Yeah.
Nick?
I look over at Crystal first. Are you sure about this?
Yeah.
You continue down the hallway, finally coming into a smaller, well-lit, spacious cavern, and as your eyes adjust, hunched over an anvil with a burning forge behind him, a thick, stocky figure sits, and with this small, fine hammer seems to work a piece of steel. Is look up at you, gray and hazed, almost you're thinking perhaps blind or made to see in the dark. And a gravelly voice says, "So, you finally come." And that is where we'll end that. And that's the essence of D&D. What you guys just kind of went through. Players will make choices. You as a DM kind of set a scenario, and you have a story in mind. You have something you're looking to tell or looking for them to experience, but it has to be malleable enough that they go and make their own choices to see how things actually turn out. And that's the whole thing. We could do a whole entire section of this strange individual you've met in this weird cavern where one of the walls is teeth. And you've now found this weird ethereal, well, translucent is a better term, blade. And what does that mean? What is the sword? What are you going to do with it? Who are you going to kill? Oh my God, what's happening? So that's
Right?
That's unique.
And you get more
and it's
comfortable
like-
with it too, yeah.
And it's like, who is that guy? Is he there to help you? Is he there to fight you? Is he just like some guy that mistook you for somebody else?
Did he make
I love
the
that
the
stuff.
dagger? Is a dagger used to kill him? Is a dagger used to? Is he supposed to be part of your group? That you say, hey, I made that dagger 6,000 years ago, and I've been waiting for you to claim it, like Sword in the Stone style. There's so many things that you could go, and the more comfortable you get with your people when you're doing it, the more like there's no hesitation. It's just like. Because you know your story, you know your character, you know your friends and your foes, and you start understanding what they would do and what they wouldn't do, and then when they do something different, you're like, oh, what happened? Are they possessed? I mean, it's just it's beautiful.
Yeah. Is the dagger cursed? Are you gonna stab me in the back, Nick?
Right. And I am, by the way.
As he plunges the dagger. Yeah, and that's the beauty of it, right? All we did was sit down for literally 3 minutes right there, and we just kind of off the cuffed it. But like you just said, Nick, in Crystal, there's 100 different things right now we could go. There's if you have any creative spark in you at all of a sudden you're going, well, what could that be? What could I do with this? Even if it even motivates you now to be like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go write a short story about this weird dagger someone would find in a pool and why it would look this way. No. Or this guy in the cave. Why is he there? Did he exile himself? It just lets you really kind of cut loose. And it's really the reason I encourage everybody to give it a run, because there is no other experience like it. There's nothing that's gonna just really, I think, help get you off your feet, especially if you're looking in the realm of writing or whatever else and you're kind of nervous to pursue it. This helps really get your feet under you and helps you have fun and make mistakes and not care. So I can't encourage it enough. D&D, it's fantastic, and you should probably play it. You should go home and play it right now. Just go get your friends, stay up till 2 a.m. Just play D&D, and abandon work, abandon social life, become addicted, and then get the Satanic Panic started for round 2. Let's go.
Let's do this. 2021. We got rid of Corona, but let's bring the Satanic back.
Let's go. We need it.
Let's make it
Yes.
3 people who kill themselves instead of 2.
Jesus.
I know, that's bad. We need Jesus, actually.
Now we do need it. He needs to be in our set.
Hey guys, thanks so much for doing this. As always, Brent, you got this all started with me, and I still count my blessings all the time. I think about you and everything you've done for me. So I love you.
Aw.
And Crystal, thank you for coming on. I know that this is not easy for you to just come on here and just present your voice. So I appreciate that, and you're awesome and empowering, and I love you guys. And thanks so much, guys, for coming. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah.
Nick,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is always just a highlight when we get to do this, and it was great to do it with Crystal. I really appreciate you having her come on and letting us talk about one of our intense nerdy passions that isn't Harry Potter.
I needed her on here because Crystal. I've had plenty of conversations with you too, where we never got to talk about it on a podcast, but it's something I've always wanted to do, and I was always like, well, are you gonna do video? No. You want to be like the voice of reason, so you're just gonna be in the background like God. it's Crystal.
She's already in several episodes where I'm like, babe, wait, who is that? who is that person? And she's
Yeah,
like, Jesus
yeah.
Christ, I'm just here to hear what you're saying because you're an idiot. Will you?
Yeah. So she's pretty much in all of them, but yeah. Well, thanks again, guys. I appreciate it, and we'll talk about the next one very soon.
Sounds good, man. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Love you guys. Take care. Bye, guys.
Love you too.